And we're live.
Hi, welcome to session 3 of the free online DML Commons course, Program Evaluations for Connected Learning. I'm Bill Penuel, and this is a course where you'll gain practical experience in the process of educational program evaluation by exploring real-world problems associated with case studies of connected learning. Today's guests are from the Fuse Studios in Chicago, Illinois. Fuse is an interest-driven learning experience developed by researchers and educators at the School of Education and Social Policy at Northwestern University. And the program engages preteens and teens in STEAM topics while fostering the development of important 21st century skills. Fuse is based on extensive research in interest development and interest-driven learning. And a reminder to everyone watching today, you can use the hashtag CLEval to pose questions on Twitter, or use the chat feature where you're watching this live webcast. I hope you'll pose questions of our guests today in this way and in future sessions. So, by way of introduction, I want to introduce first Dr. Kemi Jonah, who is a research professor at Northwestern University, who leads projects in cyber learning, computational thinking, and blended learning, and new games-based approaches to engaging youth in interest-driven STEAM learning, making, and tinkering. He's worked at the forefront of the learning sciences and learning technologies fields for over 20 years. He's a thought leader in applying insights from cognitive and learning sciences to the design of technology-supported learning environments, particularly in areas of STEM education. I also have from the Fuse program Maggie Waldron, who's the program director. And Fuse is a program, as we've mentioned, that engages students in STEAM science, STEAM projects that are interest-driven, ages 11 through 18. She's also a member of the Office of STEM Education Partnerships at Northwestern, where she's developed research-based science curricula and led numerous professional development workshops for teachers. Prior to joining the teams at Fuse and OSEP, Maggie worked as a research assistant at Palmer Station in Antarctica, studying the impacts of climate change on the Western Antarctic Peninsula. Maggie holds a BA in Biology and Environmental Studies from Lawrence University and will complete an MA in Science Communication from Texas Tech University in December 2016. And Daniela Cruella Giacomo is a PhD student at the University of Colorado at Boulder, here in our School of Education's Department of Learning Sciences and Human Development program. She's working as a research assistant with Professor Chris Gutierrez and the Connected Learning Research Network's project on leveraging horizontal expertise. And she's integrated and she's very interested in the design of learning spaces for non-dominant youth, specifically Latino immigrant communities in low-income families. Prior to her pursuing her PhD, she worked in the Bay Area in hybrid secondary schools, mental health and social work agencies, and political asylum and refugee rights organizations. She holds a master's in development studies from Cambridge University and a bachelor's in Latin American studies from UC Berkeley. So welcome Kemi, Maggie, and Daniela to today's session. So I wanted to start with Kemi and Maggie and just ask you all to say a little bit about some of the goals that you have for Fuse Studios, and also then to reflect on what some of the goals that the young people bring to the table.
Great, so I'll start with that one, and Kemi will jump in if I leave anything out. So we created the Fuse program because we wanted to create something for students who are not already very high-performing in STEM or STEAM, or who are not confident in those areas. We wanted to create a program that would be very welcoming to them and a place where they can take risks in those areas in a comfortable environment. So that was our primary goal in starting Fuse, and that was about 4.5 years ago. And that goal has continued to drive the way that we think about activities and the whole space, the way we do our educator professional development, as well as the way we design the web platform that facilitates the Fuse experience.
So I'm curious too, so what are some of the agendas that your young people bring, and how might they be different? For example, I know you all are in both schools and after-school settings. How do they think, what do you think they're thinking about when they come to Fuse Studio?
I think that probably varies quite a bit. in the in-school sessions. So Fuse now, I'd say about 85 to 90% of our youth are doing Fuse during the school day, which means it's not always elective for them to be in Fuse. It might be something that everyone in their grade is doing, for example, in their school. So the first couple of days, the first day they go to Fuse, they may not have an agenda. They may not know what they're being invited to participate in. But I think that once they've started one of our challenges, one of our activities at Fuse, their goal, my sense is their goal is to keep exploring, to keep working on what they're doing, to work with their friends, and to really kind of, I'd say to continue to explore through Fuse. In the after-school sessions where participation is more elective, I think there's probably a lot of diversity there as well. We know that a lot of times students come because one of their teachers has encouraged them to. They sometimes need a little bit of a nudge. Or one of their friends has said, hey, you should come with me today. And again, I think it's hard for them to know exactly what they're getting into until they really start the first day. But I think what makes kids keep coming back is their ability to continue to explore things that really mean something to them.
Cami, anything to add from your point of view about the goals that you have or that young people bring?
Well, those are kind of two different questions. I mean, I guess what I would say to amplify Maggie's points, and just to make it clear, we designed Fuse to really focus primarily on interest development, and especially that the very earliest stages of kids going from either I'm not interested in these topics at all, or maybe I'm not even really that into school at all, to discovering and becoming interested in something. And I think that's a pretty fundamental shift. It's not that we're not focused on learning, because we very much are. Obviously, we're learning scientists and we're all about kids learning, but I think in general, I think we feel that the ideas of interest development have really taken a back seat to learning. And in Fuse, we want to put them at least in the same seat, if not in the front seat, with respect to learning. And so, our goals as researchers are to understand how do we support kids in becoming interested and then sustaining that interest over time, and learning along the way and developing other important skills and abilities. But as program designers and program developers, we want to make sure that every kid who walks into a Fuse studio finds at least one thing that they can get interested in along the way.
And a quick follow-up, what are your key strategies for actually doing that, to help them discover an interest that maybe they didn't know that they had, or help them develop a new one?
Yeah, I mean, there are several kind of key components, and I think we can continue to unpack these throughout the session today. But I would say first and foremost is the idea that Fuse is really a interest-driven or choice-based format, which ultimately means that the students or the participants are free to choose to work on or explore any of our 24 or so challenges. There's no adult direction in terms of what they're supposed to do when. They're free to stick with a challenge as long as they want. They're free to quit a challenge. They're free to choose whether to work by themselves or with their friends. They're free to switch that arrangement dynamically along the way. So at the core of it is this idea of choice, of interest-driven exploration. And I think the complement to that is that Fuse creates a safe environment to try things and to quote-unquote fail without any of the normal kind of consequences that traditional schooling or even other programs, frankly, out of school often explicitly or implicitly apply. So if you want to foster interest-driven learning, you have to obviously create enough opportunities to find something you're interested in, but you also have to kind of make it very, very okay to try things and then quit them if you're not interested in them. And that quitting can't have a negative connotation that it typically does in other educational contexts.
Great, thanks. So Maggie and Kemi, tell us a little bit about the places where Fuse is being implemented, and what some of the different models that are being used for implementation in schools and the after-school sites.
Sure. So we have a lot of different ways that Fuse has been implemented over the last several years, and that's one of, I think, the most exciting things for us is to see how flexible it's been and continues to be. So we have we have over 60 total sites across the Chicagoland area, as well as in California and Ohio. More than 50 of those are school-based locations. And so sometimes that means Fuse is running as an after-school program. Sometimes most often it means that Fuse is run during the school day, and that can be an elective that middle school or high school students are taking. It could be actually a core class that's offered. To use the word class is a little bit, sounds a little more formal than we really want it to be, but that's kind of how the schools perceive it. So it might be something that every 5th and 6th grader will do over the course of a week. The school is allocated maybe 90 minutes of time by carving out minutes from different other periods to make it something for everyone. So that's kind of the high-level overview of what it looks like at schools. We also have a number of out-of-school environments, youth centers or libraries that are running Fuse maybe on the weekends or in the after-school setting.
And so when you think about some of the ways that sites vary, right, in their implementation, and one of the things that evaluators need to pay close attention to is that variability in implementation. And in some of those, I imagine you're seeing some enhancements, some things that maybe are making the program better because they're fitting into a specific need that you hadn't anticipated. And then other ones where you're a little worried and maybe you're thinking, wow, our program model's at risk. Could you speak to those, both the enhancements and your worries about adaptations that are putting the program integrity at risk?
Yes, I'm just trying to think of a good example. So I think one of the things we've really enjoyed seeing is how teachers who are what we call facilitators in this space are adding to the Fuse space by asking a little bit more of their student or the youth there to contribute in terms of reflecting on their work. And that's not something that we built as a necessity into Fuse because, as Kemi has alluded to, we wanted this to be a very youth-centered, free choice, self-paced type of environment. We didn't want to add too many layers of other things onto it. But some teachers have really successfully done that in a way that doesn't interfere with, I think, what is the core experience. And so that's been really great for us to see, and I think we've really learned a lot from that.
Yeah, I guess just to amplify that a little bit, Bill, and I think one of the challenges that evaluators face in these kinds of program models and Fuses specifically is that we very intentionally created a model that is what we call half-baked, in the most kind of positive sense of that term, as opposed to kind of the usual negative sense of the term. And we half-baked it very intentionally because we wanted it to be taken up and adapted in the broad kind of variety of settings, both in and out of school, libraries, community centers, summer camps. And of course, you know, it turns out that half-baking, as you alluded to, has advantages and risks, carries risks as well. And so we've been very pleased with the kind of half-bakedness of it because it has allowed schools to implement it in a wide variety of ways, as Maggie was saying, both during the school day as a required course, as an after-school club, and in libraries. But it does carry risks that teachers or others will sort of either intentionally or inadvertently impose things on the model that would harm the, I hate to use the word fidelity, but would harm the intent or goals of the model. So the easiest one is the idea of, say, grading participation in Fuse in a variety of ways, and we're constantly engaging with our school partners in a discussion about what assessment could look like or should look like, because again, as I said earlier, one of the key things that makes Fuse successful is that it is a safe space to explore, to try new interests, to you know, fail at a challenge and try again. And if you know that you're being graded, that pretty much eliminates a big chunk of that safe space. And so, the half-baked, I think, is a great approach, but is one that you have to constantly be engaging with your partners on. And Maggie and the team do a great job of sort of working through those discussions to try to balance the goals of our partners with the design goals of Fuse.
And what about that choice element? Because I could see a school requiring certain challenges, for example. Have you run into that? And if not, what have been your strategies to maybe keep that from happening?
Sure. Maggie, you want to talk about that?
Sure. So sometimes there are ways that schools limit choice, and we don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing. So, for example, one of our partners where Fuse is running actually for 6th, 7th, and 8th graders across the district, they've created subsets of challenges. So the students have choice within a certain group, and then they always have something new to look forward to in the coming years. And so that was something that was new with that partner, but I think has worked really well and continue to have. So kids are always excited about something to look forward to. We've had other partners who, as you know, to build off what Kemi was saying earlier, knowing that they have constraints in their district, that they need to be aware of standards and they might have grading involved, they have sought to limit choice in order to try to align challenges or the challenges that kids might be experiencing to certain standards. And so that's been something that we've talked with our partners a lot about. To go back again to what Kemi was saying and kind of returning to initial conversations about why they wanted to implement Fuse in the first place, which I think a lot of schools are drawn to Fuse because of its ability or as an opportunity to kind of promote a lot of the 21st century skills that we know are so important. And so if we return to that as the reason for implementing Fuse, I think it's easier then to for everyone to be more comfortable with the choice that is available and not feel like they need to restrict it to certain ones that might align better with science or engineering standards.
And I wonder too if you've run into a tension between sites wanting to encourage students to go deep and to level up as opposed to really try to explore lots of varied interests. And how do you work with that as a program director?
So we try to encourage, or we talk a lot about the different ways that there's value in the different types of experiences that kids have at Fuse. So we know that it's important to value and congratulate the youth who levels up through 6 challenges in a row, completes everything and really goes all out. And it's just as important to acknowledge that even though one student might be spending months on one particular challenge, that's also, there's a lot of value in that, and they're gaining so much from that. But also this idea of dabbling, that's kind of what we've been calling it, kind of jumping around from level 1 to level 1 across the set of challenges. I think that we've really tried to make it clear to our facilitators that we see that as being valuable too. Something that some of our schools have done to kind of take that a step further is to ask that students who start a level complete it. So that way that they're not just being it gets hard, they don't just give up, but they they persist a little bit through, because sometimes there's just a little bit of a hump, right? And having encouragement from a peer, from a facilitator in the room to get over that, I think is something that a lot of our facilitators have said is helpful.
One quick follow-up. Oh, Kemi.
Well, yeah. I guess what I was going to add to that, Bill, is that I think the diversity of engagement patterns, or even what we call maybe acceptable engagement patterns, that universe is by intent and by design very broadly defined in Fuse, and I think that poses challenges not just for our school partners, but from an evaluation standpoint as well, because when our external evaluator walks in, they're going to be wondering, like, how do I make sense of whether this thing is working or not? What do I look for among kids and their behaviors and stuff? And so immediately, that becomes an issue. there as well, because you have to be flexible enough to have a broader definition. But frankly, I see it as an opportunity, and one of the things that we've seen with our teachers and other facilitator partners is that engaging with them in this idea that there are multiple ways to achieve success or to engage successfully from a youth perspective is eye-opening and, in fact, educational for them, and helps them peel back a lot of the kind of preconceived notions that kind of school-based assessments impose. And I think often when we're doing connected learning programs, broadly speaking, all of us sort of deal with the legacy of kind of a school-based prism through which many people view assessment, view evaluation, and kind of want to count things that kids are doing in very kind of limited and myopic sort of ways, and so we're trying to really push back on that idea and give facilitators, whether they be teachers or other youth workers, a bigger idea, richer idea of how to understand and appreciate learning and engagement in all of its diverse forms.
That's great. And in a few minutes, I'll give Daniela a chance to respond to how the FUSE evaluation is tackling that issue. But before we turn to that, this is a unique project, and it is one that is true of many NSF projects. There's a research team and there's an evaluation team. Tell us a little bit about the research that you're doing on the FUSE program at Northwestern, if you could, please, and also the platforms that you're using to do that. So the FUSE platform itself, I think, is a context where you're gathering data.
Right, absolutely. So, I mean, at the highest possible level, we're asking very kind of fundamental questions about interest development and engagement. As I mentioned earlier, we're very focused on those earliest stages of taking a young person from not interested or not sure or even actively afraid or resisting STEM or STEAM ideas and topics to being interested and engaged in that. And we want to follow that in this context that we call a FUSE Studio, which is basically a room full of kids that are working on FUSE together and engaging kids together. And so, the questions are sort of, from the basic sort of like, what do kids learn as they participate in FUSE and engage in the different challenges? How do they work together? How do they form different learning arrangements dynamically through their participation? One of our grad students, Lauren Penny, is working on her dissertation looking very specifically at the development of what we call relative expertise. How do kids go from kind of not knowing very much to knowing a little bit more than some of their peers, and then how does that relative expertise actually facilitate kids' peer helping and peer collaboration? Who do kids turn to for help? How do they recognize a peer that has that expertise, or conversely, maybe they don't have enough expertise and then they turn to somebody else? And we're actually seeing really interesting evidence of that emerge. We're interested also in how do the skills and practices that kids pick up in FUSE Studios, how does that extend into other parts of the school day and then other parts of their lives outside of school as well, both in terms of new interests that they're pursuing, as well as maybe new elective STEM courses that they're participating in, or even just ways that their teachers might be seeing them work together differently now that they have been infused. And we're seeing evidence of all of those kinds of things emerge. To your point, the other interesting thing about FUSE is we're pushing the boundaries of marrying both quantitative and qualitative data. Often it's either one or the other. And in FUSE, the FUSE website mediates all the activity in FUSE. So students, whenever they want to start a challenge, have to go log on to the website, click into a challenge, and actually click on a level and say, I'm starting this level. And then when they complete their challenge, they have to upload a completion artifact, which is a picture or video, and then upload that to say, this is my proof that I'm completing this level. And so all of that data is available through the website, And so we also have demographic breakdowns by gender and race, ethnicity. So we're able to sort of slice and dice the data in aggregate, but that only tells us that something's happening. It doesn't tell us what is happening. And so, as Maggie said, we might see a young person who sticks with one challenge for 6 months straight, and we've actually seen a young person do this in our e-textile challenge. And so the question is, what's going on there? We can look at the web data and see, oh, well, we know that they've worked on the same challenge level for 6 months. Are they just screwing around, or are they really doing something? But that's when our ethnographic data kicks in. And so we have whole room video cameras that the grad students and the research team run, as well as some really cool new visor cams that we have, which are literally like tennis visors with a GoPro attached right underneath there that give us really amazing point of view video of what the kids are working on their table, what they're looking at on the screen. If they turn their head and talk to their friend next to them, we can see that as well. And so all of these data sources come together for analysis and for evaluation purposes.
And what are you hoping to learn different from the evaluation than what you're learning as a research team?
Well, we'd like to know some of the things that we're not looking for, and I think that's a great role for evaluators to play. But in general, and one of the pieces I think I forgot to mention, and I hope Daniela and Maggie can elaborate on this, we also have a survey mechanism that gets popped up, and hopefully that will get described a bit more later on to your point about not interrupting the flow. But again, when we're doing ethnographic data, at most, and we have a pretty big research team. I mean, we have 3 or 4 grad students and a postdoc, but we can only be in 1 or 2 classrooms at a time. And even then, analyzing all that video data is incredibly laborious and time-intensive, as anybody who's done video analysis knows. And so, even when we're in a particular classroom and we're watching one student or we're taking field notes, our field of vision, if you will, is very narrow. And so the evaluation, I think, helps give us a big picture framing of, how are we moving the needle in aggregate across various, say, gender, male versus female? Are we having, equivalent impacts on attitudes and perceptions? And so it gives us, the big picture view that I think often our research team doesn't have, because they're really going in depth and doing sort of a microanalytic look at learning and engagement.
Great. So Daniela, what is going on in the evaluation right now for FUSE?
Okay. Well, hopefully this doesn't contradict what Kemi said too much, but I do want to say that in doing the evaluation, and as people who are much further removed from the sites themselves than the researchers, the facilitators, and the studios, I think for us as an evaluation team, it's important to keep in mind that the raw data, so for example, the data we have on how many students are completing particular levels, how many students are completing challenges by leveling up, what types of challenges are pursued more than others, that doesn't tell the whole story. And in fact, even if we understood the whole story, and if we were there the whole time, there are so many perspectives from which to make sense of that story. And so I just, before this, was on a call with our part of our evaluation team, which includes computer scientists, which computes learning scientists, which includes people like me that are struggling to identify within any realm, and for example, a low completion rate on a challenge to someone that far removed, though they're still involved in the team, can mean something different, very different than it means to Maggie or to Kemi. Or to the students themselves. And so, as you've heard the Maggie and Kemi mention, it's really important that the ways that we make sense of the data are informed to a large degree by not only ethnographic methods that are being carried out alongside the survey and the computer-generated information, but that we're very cautious in the way that we present that data as well.
Say a little bit more about this survey, and what the FUSE evaluation survey is measuring.
Yeah, and actually I'm wondering if Maggie, do you want to say a little bit about the new survey that's being implemented, and then I'll go back to evaluation.
Sure. Sorry, the lights just went off in my office. I've been sitting still too long. So we designed this survey together. It was a group effort to augment the kinds of data that Kemi talked about earlier. So we have in-room observations in a small handful of our studios. We have web data from everywhere, but that even those together don't tell the whole story. So through the survey, we really sought to gather more information about what kinds of interests are youth bringing into the Fuse studio environment the first time, and then as they continue to come back. And how do those interests change over time? What are they then taking out and when they walk out of Fuse? What kinds of things are they exploring afterwards? How has their experience at Fuse influenced the way that they influence their different interests and how they pursue them or don't? It also helps us understand the perception of Fuse and the Fuse challenges by the youth who attend Fuse. So we have questions asking about, do you like them? Are they fun? Are they too hard? Are they too easy? Simple things like that, as well as who do you like to work on challenges with? Do you wait to do hard challenges with your friends, or can you tackle anything? Really trying to get at those perceptions of themselves in the studio.
And Kemi alluded to this. How are these things administered, these surveys?
Yes, so our surveys are administered through the website. So in an effort to have as little interference with their experience at Fuse, we are doing the surveys and in light boxes when students are logged into their account on the website. It's not a perfect, I think we're still trying to figure out exactly how to do this because the Fuse experience is so organic and so fluid, but we're still trying to get relatively reliable survey data. So we have surveys that pop up on the website at certain time points, depending on how long a student has been at Fuse. So their second day for a relative baseline, several weeks later for some early time point, and then again months afterwards to try to see what kind of long-term effects there might be.
And say a little bit more about the challenges that we've been working through in terms of implementing the surveys, because this might be one of the challenges that someone who's taking the online course could actually help us with.
That would be great. So let's see. We didn't want the surveys to take away from the momentum that a student might be having when they're working on a challenge. So we tried to make them as short as possible. That being said, they're still lengthy, especially if you're thinking about someone who's 12 years old, 11, 12 years old. But so it was a challenge to pare down the survey enough that we felt like we were getting enough data to tell the rest of the story that we needed, but also so that it wouldn't be too burdensome. So that's been one of our big challenges. A second challenge would be actually getting responses. So we have tried a couple of different ways to encourage students to respond to the survey. We tried to make it very, very lighthearted and fun. We haven't offered incentives, but we do ask for help from the facilitators to encourage them to take the survey. So and with that support, we've actually gotten much better response rates. Again, not perfect, but I think better than last year.
That's great. And Daniela, Kemi raised this issue of there's lots of different pathways, lots of possible good pathways through Fuse. How is the evaluation team handling this? How are they going about analyzing these pathways?
Well, I would say the first thing is we're going slowly and carefully, and we're working closely with Maggie on the ground level to make sure that basically all of our understandings that we're very clear in the way we're making sense of the data, as I mentioned. And so, for example, this year in particular, as Maggie and Kemi have mentioned, because Fuse is taken up and experienced in so many different sites, both in school-based, non-school-based, elective, non-elective, for credit remediation or for fun. We're interested this year in the evaluation in getting a better sense of how the Fuse implementation at various sites impacts youth's patterns of participation. as well as their attitudes towards their participation, and the interest in the activity themselves. And of course, particularly in regard to how they're making sense of STEAM-oriented activities and dispositions. And so, though that I think, I do feel, and I think Bill would agree, that we have such a nice opportunity to look at the way that a program is taken up and experienced all across the sites. So it would be nice to be able to tell a story of context variability in tandem with the data that each site is producing. Yes.
And can you speak a little bit, this is a role that our computer science members of our team are playing. Say a little bit more about what their role is in helping us understand these pathways.
Yes, well, we are very grateful for our computer scientists on our team, and we're looking. And so, what's nice about that is that not only are we interested in seeing, for example, the changes over time. So within a particular time that a student experiences FUSE, whether that's 6 weeks, 6 months, or over the course if they come back the next year and they elect into a FUSE classroom. We want to look at how not only their participation, but how their attitudes in response to the survey questions change over time. We'd also like to say something about the connected learning principles that are incited in the survey. So are the FUSE studios creating the conditions in which youth feel like they can develop their interest, that are peer supported, that are academically oriented, and is there an impact, for example, if students work in the same studio together? If they work with their friends, is that impacting the ways in which their relationship to the activity or to progressing through the activity shifts? And so we're looking in that and calling it sort of same room influences. You know, what ways is being in the same room potentially next to a student completing the same challenge, maybe at a different level, is that impacting the activity patterns of the youth? And so it's very helpful to have a computer scientist to help to figure that out.
That's great. And I know that the evaluation team is planning to study implementation in some of the sites. And a different, or maybe even better way to say it, is how the different sites are fully baking the program from its half-baked state. Can you say a little bit more about what's planned there for this year?
Yeah, so this year, in addition to being fortunate to have the 3 sort of baked-in survey points along the course of a student's experience at FUSE, we're also going to be choosing, in a collaborative effort with Maggie and the team at Northwestern, 9 to 10 focal schools that really represent the extremes of context implementation. So whether the schools are trying to move towards assessing FUSE in a certain way, whether it's elective, whether it's mandatory, and working with those program facilitators, so the FUSE site facilitators, to ask them questions that from an ethnographic interview that will hopefully tell us a little bit more about the ways in which they are making sense of how to provide the FUSE experience and guide the students through the FUSE experiences or not, and so the ways in which they engage with FUSE, how that's mediating youth participation. So hopefully, in tandem with not only the survey data, the computer-generated data from the activities, as well as ethnographic interviews of the FUSE facilitators, we will be able to tell a little bit of a more complete picture.
And this is a question for everyone now, evaluators and program leaders alike, is what are some emerging questions for you in the evaluation that are coming out of the evaluation work so far or out of the research that you think are important for the program to be able to answer?
Well, I have one that comes to mind, and then I see Kemi just unmiked, so I'll let him jump in too. You know, I think one of the things that I think most about is this diverse data implementation that Daniela talked about. So more and more schools are coming to us and wanting to use FUSE as part of their school day because of all the different skills and practices that kids can develop through their experiences with it. And so I'm really interested in how can we then meet that demand? You know, as schools have a lot of pressure on them to provide certain types of experiences for their students. How can we maintain what's great about Fuse, but also figure out how to work with those within those demands. So that's something that's really interesting to me. And I think we'll learn a lot about this spring, actually.
Before Kemi asks his question, how would you know if that was the case? Like, what would you be feeling or observing, that you said, we're meeting the demands of this expanded group of sites?
So I think what comes into the forefront of my mind is when schools, as Kemi and I have both talked about before, when they feel these constraints of needing to meet standards or needing to put grades on it, sometimes those changes aren't going to go, those constraints won't go away. And so how can we maintain what makes Fuse such a valuable experience, even if those are some of the constraints that are being imposed on it? So that's, I think that's a big question. That question is not going to go away. So that's kind of what I mean.
Well, and just to elaborate a bit, I mean, one of the things that I think is especially useful in those conversations is to take the work that the evaluation team has done and suggested and offer it to our partners and saying, here are some of the most thoughtful people in evaluating connected learning and thinking deeply about youth engagement in these contexts. And here are some of the ways that they've been able to identify important impacts beyond just counting the easiest stuff to count, which is how many times did a kid do a challenge or something, which we know is very syntactic and not at all relevant. So in fact, we sort of see a pipeline, if you will, of ideas and practices that we're working out in the evaluation, feeding back into the conversation with our partners in a way that I think is often kind of left out. Evaluation's always tacked on at the end typically, and we see it being as a very kind of iterative DBR kind of an idea. And so I guess the other answer I would say, Bill, is one of the things that's always frustrated me, both in developing materials for formal as well as informal context, is this kind of holy grail that the NSF and other funders put out there, which is we want to attract more kids, get more kids interested in STEM, academic career, pursuits, majors in college or in careers. But I've often found that the mechanism, these sort of one-off surveys saying like, well, what are you interested in now? And you're like, oh yeah, I definitely want to be a neurosurgeon. I've always found those needing to be taken with some pretty hefty amounts of salt, because kids change their minds, especially middle schoolers, and one of the things that I'm really excited about through this evaluation process is trying to come up with a more robust way of documenting kids' interest development over time, not just something that happens and they answer a survey and then it's gone, but something that we can really point to and say, not only did they kind of say they were interested in it, but we have other data that really reinforces this idea that they've chosen to spend time working on X, Y, or Z or exploring these other interests. And so I think that that's going to be an important contribution to the field in general beyond the sort of smile sheets of interest surveys kind of thing.
That's great. So we're to that time where I want to offer an opportunity to the people who are my guests here to present a challenge to the people who are out there that to actually help you with an evaluation problem that you might have. So I'm wondering if you guys might present something. It could be more than one thing about that you could use help with in implementing the evaluation plan that you have for Fuse Studios.
Well, one thing that we're very interested in, and I think we're only at the very beginning of understanding this, is trying to expand our data into the ways that participants physically move around the space and collaborate with each other. We've talked about the ethnographic data, and we can pick up some of it from that. We talked about the web data, but we're really in an after-school environment or an informal environment like Fuse, where kids are physically moving around, and that movement through different learning arrangements is really materially related to the kinds of activities that we're trying to understand. I would really love it if we could get to a place where that data stream of participants' actual physical configurations in the space, movement around the space, could be automated or semi-automated in a way that could be folded in and used as another kind of thread of data.
Sounds exciting. Maggie or Daniela, you want to add a challenge to the people participating online?
Sure. So something that comes to mind for me is we've been experimenting with lots of ways to visually represent the kinds of activity that youth have at Fuse. And we have some pretty cool maps that we've already developed, but I think that there's probably more that we could do. So it would be interesting to see what folks can suggest in terms of how to represent very fluid, very dynamic types of activity patterns from one challenge to the next over long periods of time. That's something I think that would be pretty neat to see.
Both for researchers and for the facilitators.
Mm-hmm. And for program development even. So we use a lot of the data. We've talked about kind of the research side, but we use the web data for internal evaluation as well. So to make sure that our challenges are meeting our own expectations in terms of engagement. So there's lots of benefit there.
And lastly, I would just add potentially an ethical way to incentivize youth taking the surveys more than once.
Great, because repeated surveys are very important for measuring change over time, as we all know. These are great challenges, and I want to invite everyone this week to respond to the challenges that have been posed by our panelists today. That discussion will be happening in the forum for the course. The URL for that is forum.dmlhub.net. That is forum.dmlhub.net. And you can also continue the conversation from today using the Twitter hashtag CLEval. As much as possible, though, I'd like you to try something that I think will make your contributions really helpful to the panelists as you make them, and that is when you go to a post, see if there's an answer that you can build on or challenge or extend. Rather than starting a new topic or thread, try to add to an existing one so that we can get a conversation going online and build out a suggestion that the panelists can use. Our next webinar will be February 22nd at 10 a.m. Pacific time. And then we'll be joined by Rafi Santo, Dixie Cheng, and some participants from Hive in New York. And you'll hear all about what Hive is then. And they'll join me, and our topic will be developing measures for evaluation that are tailored to programs in the world of connected learning. We'll include a focus on measures for both connected learning and connected teaching. So please join me in 2 weeks for this exciting session. And please join me in thanking Kemi and Maggie and Daniela for a wonderful session today. And that's it for this, the third session of our course on connected learning evaluation.